Hello and welcome. It's one of the longest border disputes in the world and concerns the 3,488 kilometers line of actual control between India and China. On the 10th of May, the Indian Army issued a statement about clashes between the Indian and Chinese patrols. And this seems to have escalated a little bit, but subsequently, many conversations and diplomatic initiatives have happened between the two countries, and things seem to have steadied a little bit. So let's try and understand what is the reason for this particular standoff, most likely the fourth since 2013. Secondly, what does it trace back to in terms of history? And more importantly, what are the solutions ahead? And finally, how do I as a citizen stand to be affected by anything that can happen on the border, if at all? To discuss this, I'm joined by Nitin Gokhale, founder and editor-in-chief of BharatShakti.in and stratnewsglobal.com. Nitin, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Govind, for having me.
Right. So, Nitin, tell us, what can you tell a lay citizen about what is happening at the border right now, and particularly, and which specific area that this is happening?
Well, right now, the standoff that you're hearing in the media or reading about it is happening in Ladakh, specifically in the eastern Ladakh area, between a place called Patrol Point 14, which is near the Galwan Valley. Galwan is a river which meets the Shyok River. People will have to look at the map to understand where it is.
Sure. Yeah, and we will be showing that. Yeah.
Yeah, and at the and on the northern bank of the Pangang So and Pangang Lake, you can call it. So is a lake, which is a 135-kilometer lake, which is divided between Tibet and Ladakh. And 1/3 of it is in India, in Ladakh. So it's happening on the banks of the Pangang So. So there are 4 different locations where the face-offs had happened. Now we are told the last report that one heard from Ladakh was, or got it from Ladakh, was that only at Pangang So there is a face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball kind of deployment from both sides. Otherwise, in other 3 locations, the troops are about half a kilometer, 1 kilometer apart from each other.
And these other 3 locations are in the same area broadly?
They are about 150 to 180 kilometers away from Pangang So, to the north of Pangang So.
In the Ladakh region. Right. So just to put things in context, now we also had a standoff in Doklam in 2017. Can you tell us about that and whether that has any bearing on what we are seeing right now?
Well, some commentators, erudite commentators, have linked the standoff at Doklam too. And actually the name is Dolam. That's one sort of point that I have made it very particular to say it's Dolam. But nevertheless, that happened in 2017, as you said. But that was a slightly different context because it involved a third country, Bhutan. And actually, one remark by a unnamed Chinese diplomat, I mean, he'll remain unnamed, actually encapsulates what that crisis was all about. He said to me in one of the rare candid moments that the Chinese expected the Bhutanese to lodge a diplomatic complaint or a diplomatic protest, but did not expect India to intervene militarily. Actually, what happened that time was that India walked into what India considers is as Bhutanese territory to stop the Chinese advance in the Bhutanese territory. The Chinese say it's a disputed area between them and the Bhutanese. So that's a slightly different context, although...
And they were building a road.
It's a tri-junction and of the 3 countries at... Sikkim, Bhutan and Tibet, or Sikkim, Bhutan and China are involved in that tri-junction where that Doklam standoff took place for 73 days in 2017. Slightly different context. Here we are eyeball to eyeball with the Chinese troops.
Right. So now tell us, what do the Chinese want or seemingly want, and what is India, how is India responding to this?
Well, these are historically very complex issues. The border dispute between India and China goes back to independent India and to People's Republic of China from 1956-57 and has been carrying on since then, nearly 64 years now. It flared up in a border conflict in 1962, as you are aware. and it has not really been solved. It is the longest running dispute, the longest running undemarcated contested border between two neighbors. Actually, China was never directly India's neighbor. It was Tibet who was India's neighbor, but then China annexed Tibet in 1949, and then since then it's Chinese who have been talking about it. Although, again, the border dispute can be traced back to 1914 when the British were ruling India. At that time, there was a Simla agreement or a Simla convention where the Tibetans, the Chinese, and the British Indians had come up with a border solution or a border line demarcated for what was then called the Northeast Frontier Agency, or now Arunachal Pradesh. But anyway, that's too historical. Right now, what has happened is at multiple places, the Chinese tried to put pressure on the Indian defenses or Indian posts. And India then responded equally with alacrity, with immediate response, mirroring the deployment of the Chinese at all those places, except for one place at Pengang So, where they came and sat in an area which is disputed for a long time, where face-offs have occurred before. And they have now, the Chinese have come and sat at that disputed area between what is called a finger 4 and finger 8. But that's a little complex to explain. Suffice it to say that India is wanting the Chinese to go back to pre-May 5 positions as far as those soldiers at Pengang So are concerned.
Right. So May 5th and May 6th are the clashes that were reported by the army itself. Now, what could be or what is likely the trigger for the actions that we've seen on May 5th, May 6th, or even a little earlier?
So there are 2, 3. I mean, again, these are conjectures. These are speculations. Sure. One can only come up with. And there are better people, better informed people who have talked about it. But my own assessment is there are 2 reasons. One is tactical, the other is strategic. The tactical reason is that in October last year, the Indian troops who used to use a road, if this is finger 4 and this is finger 8, to get to finger 8, which is our line of perception of the line of actual control, they used to go by a road constructed by the Chinese. Then in October 2019, Indian troops, hardy Kumaoni troops, found a mountainous route to get to finger 7, which the Chinese were surprised with. And therefore, the moment spring came this year, they wanted to prevent Indian patrols from going up to finger 8. That was a local tactical reason for the face-off at Pengang So. The strategic reason and the strategic calculation by the Chinese on the Galwan riverfront or near Aksai Chin and Ladakh border is more to do with its geopolitical standing at the moment. China sees itself as being victim of negative sentiment across the globe. People are pushing back against China for their mishandling of the COVID-19 Wuhan virus, call it what you may. And therefore, the Chinese leadership has decided to be assertive against all its adversaries, ranging from Japan to Vietnam to Philippines to India, and then going right up to the India, Bhutan, China tri-junction in Sikkim or in Doklam. So everywhere they have gone and sort of created issues, shown aggression, and wanted to demonstrate to the world and to their adversaries that we are as powerful as before. It hasn't affected us at all, the COVID crisis. That's the reason I assess that the Chinese came into the areas where they had not come for almost 58 years.
Right, and that's an important point, Nitin, for those of us who don't follow this closely, that this is something that's happening across the region. China is flexing its muscles to and with many countries. Now, you did say that this is the first time that they've actually come in and sat down. So does that mean that they have actually come in or encroached into territory that they had earlier not, or that belongs to India?
Well, no. So let me explain like this. It's not the first time, of course, that they have come into areas which India claims to be its own. They had come in Depsang in 2013. They had come 18, 19 kilometers inside the Depsang plains, pitched some tents there and were there for 21 days. Now, finger 4 and finger 8, the area between that is little complicated in the sense both claim that it is their territory, India and China, both. So the past practice has been that Indian patrols will go up to their line of perception, that is finger 8, and the Chinese will come up to finger 4, but they will occasionally come across each other, follow a set pattern under an agreement called banner drill, show banners to each other and say, you're on my territory. The other fellow will say, you're on my territory, please go back, and very cordial. This time the difference was that the Chinese came and sat and refused to go back, and then refused to allow Indian patrols to go to their claim line, to the Indian claim line. Now that is the point of contention, which is going to be the most complex of the negotiations as they are happening. As we speak, the negotiations are happening at the military level at the moment. And I expect that to drag on for another fortnight or so until it is taken to the highest level possible in the military circles or in the military hierarchy, to the Lieutenant General's level, and maybe get solved there. But both have decided, from what I know currently, the latest information is both sides have decided that they will de-escalate, they will lower the temperatures and solve this through negotiations.
Right. So, when you're sitting away from this or away from Delhi for that matter, and you read some of this in either a newspaper or watch some of the saber rattling on television, you can get a little stressed up, and there's enough stress going around in this country for sure. So how do I as a citizen view this whole issue as things stand today?
Well, one should view this whole issue as in two forms. One is the short-term tension with China. And this time, I must confess that watching China for last 30-35 years, as somebody who does national security reporting and conflict coverage, this is one of those rare occasions in 30 years after 1987 in Arunachal Pradesh, where the Chinese have moved in substantial numbers, between 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers opposite the Galwan River, brought in armor, brought in artillery guns, brought in drones, all that kind of thing. And India, fortunately, now has the capability and the wherewithal to match the deployment on the Chinese side. The numbers are large and therefore a bit of a concern tactically and in the short term. In the long run, my issue is that China sees India as its biggest adversary and competitor. And this will go on until both decide to settle the border. India has asked for clarification of the LAC number of times. The last was when Prime Minister Modi went to China in 2015. And the Chinese just don't respond to that proposal from India. It's been done a number of times before. Latest was in 2015. And there is a special mechanism. There are several border mechanisms to solve all that. But I suspect that as a citizen, we must be alert about my sense is that Pakistan is a monkey on our back. China is the bigger adversary, and we must pay more attention to the Chinese challenge. Because if you can settle the Chinese challenge, the Pakistanis can be tackled automatically, because they are dependent on the Chinese much more.
Right. So let me put that question a little differently, Nitin. Sitting away from all of this, is this something I can, trust our military, our politicians, our government to resolve? Or is this something that I should be thinking about every day, in addition to everything else that I have to think about? Is really my question.
I think it will be resolved. I mean, there are enough mechanisms. I think both countries understand, and there is no brinkmanship, unlike India-Pakistan, on the India-China front. There is enough wisdom on both sides. Of course, there will be local conflicts, local factors that will come in. So one need not worry too much about it. One must keep a watch. And one must, as I said, understand the India-China dynamics, India-China conflict, which is going to come inevitably as India rises, as India's ability to reach the borders becomes more robust. There is going to be much more contest on the border. So therefore, we have to be very careful in watching China, but there's nothing to be alarmed about.
Right. That's what I was looking for. So the last question, Nitin. So this is an unusual conflict or standoff, and has been over all these years, except maybe after 1962, no bullet has ever been fired. Even the videos or the purported videos that we see today show only physical interaction, fisticuffs and things like that. So at one level, it's almost, it's almost, it's almost comic if you may call it, I know it isn't, but I mean, it says that both sides seem to exercise extreme restraint in the way they handle this without resorting to arms and ammunition or anything more than that.
Indeed, it sort of speaks volumes of the discipline and the restraint that soldiers show in that circumstance, in those circumstances. And one small correction, that the last bullet fire there, albeit accidentally, was in 1976. And a lot of people in India don't know that after the 62 war, in which India was routed militarily in Arunachal Pradesh and what was then Nefa and then Ladakh, in 1967, there was an armed conflict between the two sides at Nathula in Sikkim, where India gave a bloody nose to the Chinese. So that is an often a forgotten chapter, but more and more people must be able to understand and read about it, because it's not as if the Chinese is a 10 feet tall soldier and is going to run all over the Indian soldier. We are evenly matched in terms of capabilities in some sectors. Of course, China is a bigger military and economic power, but India is no pushover, especially in the current context.
Right, and I'd love to engage you further on this, but we will surely return to this and get an explainer or a primer from you on where India really stands militarily in this context. But that's for another day. Thank you very much, Nitin, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Govind. Thank you.
Thank you.